In 1986, the British band Chumbawamba released an album entitled Pictures of Starving Children Sell Records in response to the Live Aid concert which had been held the previous year. Now, the Live Aid concert had been organized to help fight starvation in Ethiopia during the horrible famine of 1984 and 1985. Now, the main criticism by Chumbawamba and, of course, some others was that the concert didn't really help any starving people, but did benefit the performing artists by providing an excellent advertising platform. While the concert and album did raise large sums of money, it's questionable whether any starving people were actually helped. The same question can be asked of the U.S. food aid programs and their impact on the global hunger crisis. Today we will see that over the long term, the United States is exacerbating the global hunger crisis through its international food donations. To better understand how this is happening, we'll first look at the problems associated with the program, before examining the causes, and finally finding a solution. Since the early 1950s, the United States has initiated a number of food aid programs to combat the growing global hunger crisis. In 2009, these programs donated 2,936.7 metric tons of food aid to the world, according to the Department of Agriculture report of October 1st of 2009. Now, nearly 100% of this food aid took the form of domestically grown crops, according to the Council on Foreign Relations working paper of May 15, 2008. Now, at first, this sounds great. We're using our excess food to feed the rest of the world, save millions of lives, and create some goodwill towards America. And in short-term crisis situations, this is true. The food aid does save lives. However, continuous donations over the long term harm the other nation involved because they destroy its local economy. The May 9, 2008 U.S. News & World Report article explains that the prolonged presence of American commodities in struggling countries overwhelms local markets and drives down prices. In many developing nations, the agricultural farmers can barely scrape by on what they're able to produce from the land. They depend on being able to sell whatever excess they can grow at a reasonable price so they can support their family and make it until the next year. When their market is flooded with international food aid, however, they end up going out of business because they can't compete with free. So they themselves are then added to the ranks of the hungry. With the local farmers out of business, that base for future recovery is also destroyed. And with the foundation for future agricultural and economic development destroyed, the country is doomed to an endless cycle of hunger, which only leads to chronic dependence on international food aid. The January 19, 2010 Wall Street Journal article points out that the food aid fosters the very culture of dependency these countries so desperately need to break. As this dependency increases, the potential for instability, violence, and government corruption also increase, none of which produce the desired effects or goodwill towards America these programs were designed to create. No one benefits from this relationship, least of all the starving people involved. Now, there are problems on the U.S. side of these food shipments as well. Everyone in this room is aware of the rise in the price of gas over the past few years and the impact it's had on our pocketbooks. Now, international food shipments are no different, and considering the huge distances involved, even a small increase in the price of fuel dramatically increased the cost of actually getting the food to the other nation. The U.S. News & World Report article of July 8, 2007 explains that the U.S. spends upwards of 60% of its aid budget on transportation and administration costs. Not only are we spending more money getting the food to the other nation, but we're also spending more money on insurance to protect these shipments from international piracy and terrorism. So now that we understand the problems associated with America's food aid programs, let's examine the causes. Now, there are two major causes that we need to consider. The first of which is high food prices in hungry nations. As the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations website, last updated January 9, 2011, explains, in even the hungriest nations in the world, more than 1,600 calories per capita per day of food are being produced. And of the hungriest nations, only 9 produce less than the 2,000 calories per capita per day recommended by the USDA for a healthy diet. This means that the cause of global hunger is not solely a lack of food, or rather access to food sources, which is where food prices and food aid come into play. The November 28, 2005 Der Spiegel article demonstrates that in Ethiopia, The island farmers are able to produce large amounts of food, but unfortunately they can't afford to sell it. It costs them $50 to produce a ton of grain, but if they wish to sell it in the hungry regions of Ethiopia, they must do so for $25 a ton because food aid has driven down the price. Now, of course, they can't afford to do business like this, so they don't bother shipping their food to these hungry regions, which worsens the food shortage by removing access to their grain. Now, the second major cause is that of American attitude towards international food aid. As the Time magazine article of June 14, 2007 explains, food aid feels good. Americans like the idea that excess food available in the United States can be shipped abroad to feed the hungry, and it's why events such as the Live Aid concert have resonated with so many people. However, as a nation, we need to understand that these programs are harming the other nation over the long term. The Time magazine article goes on to explain that it's been 25 years since the Live Aid concert took place. Ethiopia remains a desperately hungry nation, even though it receives more food aid than any other country except Sudan. Obviously, our long-term food aid programs aren't working, even if they leave Americans feeling as though they've done something. So now that we understand what's causing the problems associated with America's food aid programs, let's find a solution. Now, in a short-term crisis situation, such as the recent earthquake and tsunami in Japan, emergency food shipments from the United States are vitally important because they do save lives. Any changes in our long-term food aid strategy don't have to affect these short-term emergency plans. However, to help hungry nations in the long term, a more innovative solution needs to be found. This solution involves changing the way we invest in international food aid. Instead of buying excess food available in the United States and shipping it abroad, the U.S. should invest in food that's already available in the nation or in the surrounding region, what's known as regional sourcing. As the previously cited Council on Foreign Relations working paper states, we must shake off the charity model of international food aid and focus on a smarter approach. By buying this locally grown food, we preserve the local economy of the nation while still providing the food necessary to feed the population in need. The United States would just be connecting the dots between those who have food and those who desperately need it. With the local farmers still in business, that base for future recovery remains in place, and the country retains a degree of self-sufficiency. The United States would also save in the logistics costs, which are currently draining so much of our aid budget. Now, as a model, the United States can follow the lead of the European Union, who have already made the switch. The EU now requires that less than 10% of its aid budget be spent on its own domestically grown crops, according to the previously cited Time magazine article. If we were to adopt this solution, we would be spending our money wisely and efficiently, while greatly benefiting the other nation over the long term. Now, unless you yourself have a vast personal fortune, you probably can't fund any sort of aid program personally. You can, however, contact the appropriate government officials or nonprofit organizations and urge them to change the way they think about international food donations. If you decide to get involved personally, don't get caught up the way so many aid groups do in dime store activism. Contrary to popular belief, wearing a blue t-shirt on Wednesdays will not actually feed any starving people in Sudan. Think about whether your actions will actually benefit the other nation over the long term. Today we've examined the United States international food aid programs, and we've seen the problems associated with them. We've also examined the causes before finally finding a solution. Now, global hunger is a complex and difficult problem, but this is one area where we can truly make a difference. As the largest aid contributor, any changes made by the United States will have a dramatic impact across the globe. We have noble intentions with our food aid programs, but unfortunately they're having unintended consequences. And it's not just statistics we're talking about here. It's other people's lives. If we were to adopt regional sourcing, we could actually do something meaningful to combat global hunger, instead of just buying albums.